Hey there, today we are talking about sous vide strip steaks. We're going to dive into the different types of strip steak and go through the whole process so you can make perfectly cooked strip steak whenever you want. Coming up next on Amazing Food Made Easy. Hey there, I'm Jason Loxton from Amazing Food Made Easy and the president of the International Sous Vide Association, and I'm really excited to dive into all things strip steak with you today. Sous vide strip steak is one of my favorite cuts of meat. It's my go-to for a lot of special occasions, and it's something that has a lot of beefy flavor. It's less expensive than a ribeye, which is my altogether favorite cut of meat, but strip steaks you can get a lot less expensively, and with sous vide you can cook them a little bit longer, tenderize them a little bit more, and to me it's one of my favorite cuts to sous vide. Strip steak is kind of a general catch-all term for a lot of different cuts of steaks. They all come from the strip loin though. The different cuts depend on where it's cut and if there's any bone or other kind of things still left on it. It's all about the trimming and the portioning. And so that means that most of them sous vide the exact same. You can have a top loin steak, a strip steak, a Kansas City strip, a New York strip. There's a lot of different steaks out there, but they all behave really similarly when you sous vide them. You can also sous vide the entire strip loin if you want. Just increase the time a little bit based on the thickness, and you're going to have a great presentation if you're having a big party or a family gathering. So why sous vide strip steak? As I mentioned, I think it's one of the best cuts to sous vide because it can be a little bit tough, especially if you get out of the prime range of quality. And cooking it with sous vide allows you to break it down a little bit more. The connective tissues ease up a little bit, and it's a lot more tender and juicy. Just something that I love in my steaks, just like most people do. We're not talking tenderization like 72-hour short ribs here. I usually like to go 4 to 8 hours on my strip steaks, and that breaks it down enough for me. A lot of it, like I said, depends on the quality though. If you have a Wagyu strip or a prime strip, you might not need to cook it for any longer than just heating it through. But if you have a choice or select, you can really benefit from tenderizing it some and breaking that connective tissue down. The other big thing that I like about using sous vide is it makes it super easy to cook strip steak. I've got Wagyu strip steak and prime strip steaks before, and those can be expensive, and I don't want to ruin them. Now, I cook a lot, and so I know if I focus really, really hard, I can put out a perfectly grilled, pan-fried, or pan-seared steak. But I have to focus, and I'm worried about it the whole time, especially when it's an expensive cut. With sous vide, it's perfectly cooked edge to edge every single time. There's no bullseye. There's no concern about me ruining an expensive cut that's probably purchased for a special occasion that I don't want to ruin. The final thing is that you can pasteurize your steak with sous vide without overcooking it. At 130, 135, you can pasteurize your meat. That makes it safe for pregnant people, for immunocompromised people, or if you have a lesser quality cut. Some of those end up being blade tenderized, which means that pasteurization really helps and is important, especially if you're trying not to get anyone sick. You can cook them long enough to pasteurize them, especially with something like a strip steak that a little bit more tenderizing is a good thing. I almost always pasteurize my strip steaks because it's easy and I know that the end result is going to be safe for my friends and my family. So what's the best time and temperature for sous vide strip steak? Well, there's no perfect exact one because a lot of it comes down to personal preference. So if someone tells you there's a correct temperature, you know that they are wrong. But for me, I like 131 Fahrenheit and I cook it generally for 4 to 8 hours. That's my go-to of what I'm really trying to accomplish. But for coming up with your own, here's a few guidelines to keep in mind. The first is for temperature. It is a steak. So what temperature do you like your steak cooked at? Rare, medium, or well done, and with sous vide you can dial in to the specific doneness you want. A lot of people like rare at 125, medium rare is usually 131 to 135, and medium is about 135 to 140-ish. People can argue about exactly where they fit in those ranges, but that's where I go to when people ask for a specific temperature. One thing to keep in mind is if you are cooking a rare steak and you're much below 130, you don't want to go for more than a few hours because you're still in the danger zone. You're not pasteurizing the food, you're not making it safer to eat, you're actually just helping grow bacteria. So you want to minimize the amount of time it is there. When it comes to what's the perfect cook time for strip steak, it really comes down to, are you trying to heat it through or are you trying to tenderize it? As I said, if you tenderize it, I like 4 to 8 hours. You can go a little bit longer depending on the quality of the meat. Trying to heat it through, it all comes down to thickness. A 1-inch steak will take about an hour and 15 minutes. A 1.5 inch will take about 2 hours and 20 minutes. And a 2-inch steak will take about 3.5 hours. Now these are minimums that you want to cook it to heat it all the way through, but you don't have to worry about pulling it at the exact time it's done. If you're doing a whole strip loin, it will take longer than the 3.5 hours, but you can also minimize the cook time a little bit using what's called delta T cooking. By setting the temperature 2 to 3 degrees higher, you can knock off about 30% off the cook time. If you want to learn more about delta T cooking, you can go to afmeasy.com/delta T. I also have a lot of sous vide heating charts that you can find on my website, and Douglas Baldwin has some very reputable ones as well. Now that you know the perfect time and temperature to cook your sous vide strip steak at, what's the general process? I'm going to dive into this a little bit so you have a feel, especially if you aren't too familiar with sous vide. This should help you figure out the entire process so your strip steak will turn out perfectly cooked. And to help with this, I'm going to link up my favorite simple sous vide strip steak master recipe. It makes it easy to put out a perfectly cooked strip steak every time that can then be served with your favorite sauces or rubs to make a great meal. You can combine it with whatever you normally serve your strip steak with, and it makes it very easy to just make sure you have perfectly cooked strip steak every single time. First, you want to prep the strip steak. Most strip steaks come pretty well trimmed and portioned already. Sometimes they might have a rim of fat around it. You can take that off if you want. I usually leave it on because most strip steak fat is the tasty kind of fat. It's not kind of the tough, chewy type. Some of them also have a little bit of connective tissue around the outside. If you want to trim those first, feel free to remove them. You can always cut stuff off after you cook it as well. If you're cooking an entire strip loin, obviously you can just put that in the bag. But if not, you're going to break it down into the portion size as well. When it comes to steak size, I like 1.5 inches to 2 inches thick. I think it makes it easy to put a good sear on it, and that's kind of what I go to, even if I end up cutting the steak in half when I serve it for me and my wife, because we don't need a full 2-inch thick one. But it has a little bit better shape when I serve it, and it makes it easier to sear and get a good crust on it. For higher quality steaks, I just add salt and then I bag it. For lower quality ones that could use a little boost in their flavor, I like to use spice rubs, like garlic powder, onion powder, whatever your favorite steak rub is. Some people hate using steak rubs or rubs of any kind in sous vide, which is fine. I don't argue with them about it, but I like using rubs, so if you want to try it, feel free to experiment some. And occasionally I'll put some fresh herbs into the bag, like rosemary, thyme, or any of those woody herbs can add some really good kind of background flavors to your steak, depending what you're trying to accomplish with it. I always hold off on adding black pepper until after the searing process, because with the sous vide and the sear, sometimes it can add some off flavors. And I don't recommend putting butter or olive oil or any fat into the bag. It can draw out some of the flavor from the meat. Unless you use all the juices then, you're going to miss out on that flavor. So add the butter, add the oil when you are searing or after the sear, and you're going to be able to enjoy all the great flavors that it does add. Next, put your strip steak into the sous vide bag and seal it. You can use any food-safe, heat-safe plastic bag. There's several types of sous vide bags out there. I used Ziploc brand freezer bags for years, just using the water displacement method. You can use an edge sealer like a Food Saver or a chambered vacuum sealer if you want to go big. I have a VacMaster that I love. My parents use Polyscience, and I know Vesta and a few others have really good chambered vacuum sealers as well. If you've portioned this already, for best results, put it in a single layer. You don't want to stack your steaks, otherwise you're increasing the thickness, which increases your cook time. You can then seal it with steaks. It doesn't matter how hard of a seal you put on it, so you can use whatever the default setting on your machine is. It's not going to get crushed very much, and even the water pressure using the water displacement method is enough to get enough air out for the meat to be in close contact with the water. The next step is to prepare your water bath. You want to fill a container with water. You can use a stock pot. I use a polycarbonate container, which basically means fancy plastic. Lepavi, Rubbermaid, and Cambro make very good versions of those, and a lot of them have lids and racks and other accessories that are made to work with sous vide. And you can also use a cooler that a lot of people use. Just set your water level between the min and max line because you don't want it to turn off in the middle of your cook. And then set your sous vide machine to the desired doneness for whatever temperature you wanted. We talked about the different ranges. Just set it to 131, 135, whatever you're up for, and then put the food in it and you are good to go. You don't have to wait for the water to preheat. It doesn't really affect the timing much at all. If you're doing something more specific like a salmon or a fish, then I usually let it preheat. Otherwise, the meat can heat as the water is heating as well. You want to make sure all the food is below the water line. I use sous vide magnets to do that. It simplifies the process so much. They're one of the best investments I ever made at like $5 or $10. Not a big investment, but it was perfect and helps my sous vide cooking a whole lot more. Once the food's in the bath, you can go do whatever you want to do. Let it cook away while you go mow the lawn or play video games or go read a book. One of my favorite things about sous vide is that it's completely hands off and you don't have to worry about the cook time. Once it's cooked all the way through, either been heated or tenderized, you can remove it from the bath. Then you have two options. If you want to save it for later, you can chill the bag in an ice bath, then you can put it in the fridge for a few weeks. I love doing that for parties or larger gatherings. I can cook all the food ahead of time, reheat it for about an hour, and then sear everything off and serve it. It's a great way to remove stress from a lot of family gatherings or parties. But regardless, whenever you're ready to eat it, it's time for a quick sear. It comes out of the bag not looking too good, and you want to put a good brown crust on it. You want to take your sous vide strip steak out of the sous vide bag. You want to dry it off really well. Some people forget about this step and then they run into trouble searing it. So you want to get all that water off the outside. I like to use paper towels or dishcloths that I have specifically for removing juices from sous vide foods. But you want to use something like that that's really going to pull the moisture away from the steak. That'll give you a lot better sear. You're going to sear it over high heat. The middle of your strip steak is perfectly cooked, so we don't want to raise that anymore. We're not cooking it, we're just searing the outside. So high heat is your friend. You can use a hot skillet, a cast iron pan, a hot grill. Some people even use a smoker if they want to add some unique flavors to their strip steaks. Because it is hot, you want to make sure you use an oil with a high smoke point. There's several that fall into that category. Some of the most common are avocado oil, grapeseed oil, extra light olive oil, not extra virgin, ghee, some vegetable oils work well, and some people swear by a mayo sear. They put mayonnaise on the outside and it coats it and makes the sear easy. I use it for grilled cheese sandwiches, but I haven't yet tried it for steak. Should be on my to-do list probably. Because it is perfectly cooked, we want to make this sear quick. So we're looking at 2 to 3 minutes total. You want to be flipping it every 30 to 45 seconds so both sides can get a good sear on it and doesn't cook too far into the middle. If you struggle with your sear and want to try to get a better one tip is to chill your food first. This can be either just leaving it on the counter for 10 or 15 minutes before you sear it, which is what I usually do, or you can even put it in an ice bath for 10 or 15 minutes if you really want to maximize the amount of time you have to sear it. Then as soon as that turns golden brown, has a nice little crust on it, pull it off so it doesn't overcook, and you are ready to serve it. Strip steaks, I like to serve them whole on a plate with some mashed potatoes and some cream spinach and some mushrooms on the side. It's one of my favorite steakhouse meals, and I like to take advantage of that when I make my own high-quality strip steaks. But you can thinly slice it, you can serve it with compound butters, fresh herbs. There's lots of ways you can take your strip steak, and whatever way you like is the right way to do it now that you have a perfectly cooked one. So now you have all the information you need to perfectly cook strip steak every single time. Make sure that you're going to wow your friends and family. And for people that are just getting started, I always recommend my free Quick Start course at afmeasy.com/quickstart. It'll step you through everything you need to know to get the most out of your sous vide machine. I also do a lot of work with the International Sous Vide Association, including free showcases, demos, and cook-alongs at the isva.org. And my Facebook group is Exploring Sous Vide with 40,000 enthusiastic sous vide cooks at afmeasy.com/Facebook. Till next time, I'm Jason Logston.